Employers of Reddit, what are your crazy employee stories? A few years ago I was a kitchen manager at a place in Charlotte, NC. I don't know if it is common knowledge or not, but drug use in kitchens is very common, and most of the time accepted. That being said, I had a line cook who had come in, tweaked out on cocaine. He came to me, explained the situation, apologized, asked if he could run somewhere and come in a little later in better shape. It was slow, and most of the prep was done, so I said he could have an extra hour. He comes back 45 minutes later and is calmed down, stopped shaking and had a grin on his face. He was one of my better line cooks, so I was glad to see that I didn't have to reprimand him. We begin the dinner service and everything is running smoothly when I look across the line and he begins to look as if he's falling asleep while working the grill. He assured me that he was fine. 15 minutes goes by and I see him collapse, landing with his face and arm on the grill. He didn't even wake up. I run across the kitchen and push him off. Skin literally melted to the grill. As he hits the ground, he wakes up and simply says, "Oh shit, chef, may I go to the hospital?" The smell was horrific. At 7 p.m. on a Friday night we closed the restaurant, opened all the doors and windows and cleaned up the mess. We bought new plates for the grill. Don't worry, as I'm doing my order for the next day. Around 10 p.m. he comes back in, bandaged up, and says, "Chef, can I help with anything?" Astonished, I couldn't reply, and he continued to explain that he went to his dealer's house and got a shit ton of oxycontin and snorted it so he could calm down, and he just nodded out. "But it's okay, they gave me morphine, so I can still work, and I'm a dumbass, so don't worry about workers' comp. I just want to still have a job." 2 weeks later he returned to work, sober and hasn't touched a drug or had a drink since. I arranged so that his hospital bills were paid, but he had no paid time off. One of the best employees, and craziest mother truckers I will ever meet. Edit. After seeing how much you guys like this story, I contacted him. It's been about 3 years. He met his now fiancée at an NA meeting, expecting a daughter in a few months, and was just called about becoming the sous chef at a restaurant opening in Atlanta. He moved there because he said that Charlotte was too dangerous for him and there were too many haunting memories. Thank you guys so much. It makes me proud. He cried thanking me on the phone when I told him about this, and I would have probably not done so if it weren't for this. Thank you from the both of us. There was this Asian lady at my first job out of college who would sneak away into the lunchroom, which was in the basement of the building, and steal lunches. She'd go through all of them, taking bites, or eating it all. If she took a bite of something she didn't like, she'd throw it in the garbage. Staff would come downstairs to find their lunches devoured, or in the trash, with one bite taken out of it. This all came to a head one day when some guy was up in arms after his meatloaf sandwich fell victim to the Asian lunch thief. He ended up catching her, she was fired, and keyed everyone's cars. I work as a supervisor in a drugstore. One night, one of my employees was seen just letting someone walk out with hundreds of dollars of merchandise. A few minutes later, he went outside to collect the shopping carts. I'm reviewing the video evidence of this happening at the time, and on the phone with my store manager. The employee was outside for a pretty decent amount of time. I hadn't noticed right away because I was busy collecting the evidence, but my other cashier called me up and told me that he still hadn't come back in. 15 minutes later, as I walk downstairs, he comes back inside with one shopping cart and the guy was high as a kite. Because I am not a store manager, my hands are rather tied as far as what I am able to do at the time, so I just sent him home and keep someone else for the rest of the night. The employee called me later. I happened to be best friends with his sister, and he started talking about how he hates snitches and that people should just leave other people alone. He was rambling on and on. The next day, the loss prevention manager was there, as well as my manager. The employee was terminated. It turned out that he would let his friends walk out with baskets of merchandise without scanning it. Then he would go to collect carts, and they would give him meth in payment for all the stuff. He thought he had this master plan, and that he was sticking it to the man. It was really sad to see. Since then, the employee has been incarcerated and successfully completed rehab. I am glad to say that He is doing so much better now and has apologized profusely about the entire incident. We have this one relatively crazy woman that works in her shop. She's got a son who at the time of this story was around 16. This woman decides that her son needed some experience sexually with an older woman, so she actually went to one of the women in our accounting department who was around 60 or so and asked her if she'd be interested in having sex with her 16-year-old son because she wanted his first time to be with someone experienced. I shit you not, I was sitting outside our HR person's office when the complaint was filed. This was years ago, probably a decade or so. I used to be a manager at a shitty taco place and asked one of our shitty high school employees to take the trash out at the end of the shift. After counting the money, it occurred to me that my shitty employee still had not come back inside. I peeked out the back door and saw him railing some shitty tubby girl on top of the drive-through speaker. I didn't know what to say. We locked eyes. He kept wrecking her shitty bag. It was awkward, but fairly alpha on his part. Credit where credit is due, and all. I never saw him again. I just went back inside, and he never came back in the back door though. Presumably he did come in the back door, if you know what I mean. Worked at a new Fry's that opened in my old town a number of years back. It was pretty bad initially, and they really overworked employees. The turnover was huge, and later a suit was filed against this specific Fry's. In any case, when I started there was a blonde woman who I forget her name now. Let's call her Beth. Beth was overly enthusiastic, to the point of being incredibly annoying to any and every employee customer. Beth was apparently also a pathological liar, and frequently left her shifts early to do God knows what. When she was fired, she came back with a nice, purple present, all wrapped up with a white bow and everything. It was meant to be an apology to the manager, but she quickly dropped it off and took off saying she was busy. It smelled like it had been doused in a gallon of perfume, but she seemed half crazed, so whatever. The manager for her department at the time took it and opened it near the registers. Inside was a lump of shit. She shit in a box and gave it to her manager, as a gift of course. Edit. I should clarify that the box was not large, half a foot length, and widthwise. There was no smearing or smudging along the box. It was about as neat as you could make a turd in a box. Edit 2. It's an odd feeling when your top rated comment is about someone shitting in a box. Reddit works in mysterious ways. As an officer in the USAF, I was responsible for keeping plenty of crazy employees in line. As you enlist, you belong to the government. As an 05 I was in charge of you. I had one E3 that was batshit insane. He was in the army and stationed at FT Detrick. This grunt was obviously bipolar. No idea how he made it this far. I'll give you just one example. We had muster at 6 o'clock and he shows up, covered in mud, raging like he just shot himself full of bull steroids and MDMA. He mumbles something like, "I just ran 4 miles sir, ready for 4 more." He was filthy, beat red and had the eyes of a rabid dog. Apparently he went into an extreme high and woke up at 4 o'clock and ran 4 miles through the muddy woods. He went on to serve 24 years before he retired at a higher rank than me. I was a manager of a couple departments for a local grocery chain a few years ago. I had a girl on one of my teams who was terminated for basically breaking every rule in the book. She sucked. Even though I wasn't the one who fired her or made the decision, I didn't have that power. She decided to take revenge on me. A week after her termination, I started getting calls on my cell phone from strange men wanting to have sex. Turns out she made a fake listing on Craigslist, soliciting me for sex. I'm a woman. After much digging and convincing one of the strange dudes to assist me with getting evidence, I was able to make a police report. It's a 2-year felony to impersonate someone online, solicit them without permission in Michigan. At that time, the fun part is when the police wouldn't press charges because it was a one-time thing. Yep, this girl endangered me by offering me for sex on Craigslist with my personal cell phone number, but it was a one-time thing. I'm still pissed. Bob, not his real name. Oh god, Bob, not his real name. Bob lasted 2 weeks which was about 2 weeks longer than he should have. During orientation, he challenged me on several of our rules, many of them having to do with health and safety. He did not want to wear eye protection or closed-toed shoes since it was too hot in our climate-controlled manufacturing plant. He wore a Bluetooth headset, which he proceeded to answer several times through orientation, and when informed that personal cell phones use was only permitted during scheduled breaks, he informed me that he was conducting business and needed it. This was when I decided Bob needed to go. However, HR and the company president also needed to sign off on it, and after 3 hours decided I had not given him a fair shake. Bob was untrainable. He had one job to do: balance material in a centrifuge and make sure it was draining. We had charts posted, outlining how many of what to put in, and how to arrange things. So after working with him a day, showing him and overseeing him arrange and balance, was satisfied that I could leave him unattended for 5 minutes while I grabbed a washroom break. I was dead wrong. I start to hear the clanking of metal on metal and run back to shut down the machine, to find that it was not loaded or balanced properly. When asked why he loaded it against regulation, he said, "It takes too long to arrange everything." Still, nobody wants to get rid of him except me. So as the GM of a manufacturing plant, I spent the next week with Bob, babysitting him as he loaded a centrifuge until I finally had to leave him to do my actual job. In under a half hour, from improper loading, he had damaged the machine. While I was loading setting up the backup, I instructed him to go to the boardroom to review the loading charts and that I would call him back when I was finished. About 20 minutes later, I go to the boardroom. No Bob. There is nobody in the men's room. As I am walking back to my production floor, I notice that there is somebody in the president's office. This is pretty strange, since the president is out of the office that day, and the only two people who are permitted in the office are myself and the office manager. Wouldn't you know it, just down the hall, the office manager is happily chugging away at some reports in her office. So I go in, only to reveal Bob watching some of the most depraved Spanish porn on the president's computer. While I didn't have the power to, I terminated him on the spot and cleared it with HR and the president later, who a quick viewing of his browser history agreed that it was justified. Apparently Bob didn't know how to browse incognito. Bob has since filed a case with HRSDC for wrongful dismissal. I work at an East Coast gas station that sells made-to-order food. Most people who call out of work will give some type of legitimate excuse as to why they can't come in, they are sick, etc. One Friday night, a third shift has called to say he wasn't coming in that night. His reason? "I have a life," and hung up. I had a co-worker once who was just ridiculous. First, he was a newly arrived immigrant from Senegal, so some of this is probably cultural differences. 1. He didn't shower. Seriously, this was at a summer camp, so we were there 24 hours a day. He didn't shower. 2. In lieu of showering, he just used Axe body spray. Lots of it. Yes, this was when we were in high school. 3. Similarly, he did not brush his teeth. Instead, he used mouthwash probably 4 or 5 times a day. He had a little bottle of it that he carried in his pocket. 4. Ridiculous lies. He claimed that in Africa, he was circumcised with a knife and then sent out into the jungle for a month to survive on his own. He claimed that he had a Hummer, but didn't like to drive it because he didn't want someone to steal it. He claimed to have had sex with most of our female co-workers, but that he made them swear to not talk about it, etc, etc. 5. He regularly wore a bathrobe instead of a shirt. 6. He would hit on anything that moved and could definitely not read the rejection signs. The worst was when the mother of one of our campers complained that he got her number from the 7-year-old camper and had called her over the weekend. I'm sure there's more that I have blocked out of my memory. I'll add to this later. Pretty sure I've told this story before, but it fits. I was working at JIT Fiddle Center right out of high school. The turnover rate at a store like that is pretty high. If I remember correctly, I saw 70 new hires in the 2 years I worked there. One guy we hired lasted less than a day. He was introduced to everyone, but on that day every register was occupied. So he was sent into our warehouse to help them do stocking and to learn the computer system. However, as I found out later, it was pretty evident that he was at the very least functionally illiterate, so the warehouse manager gave the guy an X-Acto knife and had him go bust down cardboard boxes. However, after about an hour or so, he couldn't be found. The events that follow I was not directly witness to, just told about after the fact. After searching for this man for a while, he was discovered sitting in a pile of gig bags at the top of one of the warehouse shelves, about 15 feet off the ground, singing softly to himself, smiling broadly, with tears on his face, and cutting his wrists with the knife. From where I was, all I knew was that the GM and a couple of the AMs got paged to the warehouse, and soon after we heard sirens in our parking lot. The GM, a guy with a bit of a temper, was heard yelling very loudly in his office right afterward, though who he was yelling at, I don't know. Never saw that kid again. Employee asked to have Friday off to watch a big darts contest. Failed to give nearly enough notice, but what the hell. Okay. Phones the boss at home Sunday. I'm through to the third round, which is on Monday. Can I have Monday off? You said you were going to watch a darts contest. Well, yeah, but I wasn't expecting to get past the first round. Then I would have been watching after that. Can I have tomorrow off? No, you're needed. It's too short notice. Oh, okay. Doesn't turn up for work on Monday. In the evening, his girlfriend rings up. Paul's made it through to the fourth round. Tomorrow. He asked me to call and say he can't be at work tomorrow. Sorry, but if he isn't at work tomorrow 8 AM, he needn't bother turning up at all. Doesn't come to work Tuesday, turns up 8 AM Wednesday, and seems genuinely surprised when he is told to get lost. He's fired. We own a salvage yard, junkyard, and we usually have a few cats around. Every now and then one of these cats will claim us and live in the office. We feed it, take it to the vets, and it becomes our junkyard pet cat. One particular cat was awesome, and all the guys loved this cat, even the burly guys. They would all share their lunches with the cat. This one guy that used to work for us was a real a-hole. One day he decided that he didn't like the cat anymore. He took a can of spray paint and painted the poor kitty all over, head to tail. When the cat came into the office, my husband, who is the boss, went ballistic. The first thing my husband did was wash the cat off as best as he could. Then he went into the shop and raised holy hell, screaming at everyone, until a new guy finally told him that he saw Jim spray paint the cat. My husband was raging and wanted to really F this guy up bad, but instead called the cops and filed animal cruelty charges and fired him on the spot. This guy had the balls to file for unemployment for unlawful termination. He was denied several times, but kept opposing the judgment. We fought his argument all the way to the highest level of state review, where he was granted full unemployment benefits. The reason was, even though he broke the law while at work, it didn't state in our handbook, no spray painting of cats, or no unlawful activities at the workplace. We thought that would have been a given. The guy finally got his though, kinda. He's serving a year in jail for fleeing from the police while drunk. The cat lived for several more years. One guy would always come in on Sunday to feed her, and he found her dead. She had died in her sleep, in the box filled with blankets that they kept for her. Quite a few years ago, my boss left our office in Washington, D.C. and went to Florida on a company-paid business trip. A publishers meeting was taking place near Tampa. It happened to be springtime, which is when baseball's spring training takes place. The second morning after my boss was away, the Washington Post publishes a photo on the front of the sports section, showing a line of fans waiting to get autographs from Cal Ripken. Who's first in line? My boss. Later that day, I was in the office of my boss's boss, with two other guys. When my boss calls in, the head dude puts him on the speakerphone. The conference is going well, he says. He's meeting lots of good business contacts that should promote sales, he says. The meetings are running long and a little boring, but he's keeping up with them, he says. He gets back 2 days later, and gets his company travel privileges suspended for 2 years. Set up. In the next town there was a workplace shooting that ended up being a murder. It's very tragic. The next week, we announced that there is going to be a layoff of 10 out of 160 people. One of the best most capable and most valuable people in the shop, announces in the lunchroom that if his name was on the layoff list, he is going to shoot up the place, just like what happened in the other town. He never made the list, as he was taken out of work by the police and terminated for cause. The sad part was, he would have never been laid off. I worked for a big company years ago as the shipping manager. One of the guys I hired was an ex-Russian army guy. He was pretty good, hard worker and all that, still a little off, if you know what I mean. So one day, he doesn't show up and no phone call. The next day he calls me and he sounds like he's high. He's in the hospital. After work, I go by the hospital. We were kinda friends, and his whole right side is effing black as night. Not a stitch of white. Serious bruising. Broken leg and arm. I asked him what the hell happened, and he told me that him and his friends were having party in his 5th floor apartment. He was having an argument with one of his friends, as seemed to be a regular Russian thing for them to do. His friend was saying that he never follows through or something like that. So my friend stated that he always follows through. My friend says, if I told you I would jump out that window, I would. His friend says, hahaha, you wouldn't dare. So, crazy effing Yuri runs and leaps out the window, down onto the parking lot below. He spent over a month in the hospital to prove a point. Effing ridiculous. He quit, and I didn't see or hear from him until a year later. He called me on the phone, all drunk, telling me I was Jesus. The end. I've had a few crazies over the years. Let's start by saying that, at my bookstore, the general manager is so anti-confrontational that you have to basically wig out completely on a customer to get fired. She is also a horrible judge of character, so we had, and have, some real winners on staff. Past crazies, names changed, although who really cares? Darlene, older woman in her late 50s early 60s. One of those employees that is slightly annoying because she can't seem to remember how to do anything, but generally isn't too bad. Then she starts showing off the gun that she keeps in her purse on the sales floor in a town where there really is no need to carry a gun 24/7. David, foreign guy from South America who was going to the local university for a law degree. He would corner the petite music manager and declare his undying love for her. He was a huge partier and came in one morning talking about how he had to get his car's wheel fixed because he was driving home, got a flat tire and didn't want to stop, but couldn't figure out why there were sparks coming from it. Idiot was driving on his rim. He also did coke and did some on the clock. Chris, your classic creeper. Pedo glasses, slightly overweight, bad comb over. Told everyone that he was ex-Black Ops, that he had written a book that had been picked up by Tor but wouldn't be published that year because they didn't want to compete with Harry Potter, and that he was getting offers to write some screenplays. He harassed every younger female on staff, despite all of us telling the general manager, was eventually fired after threatening to kill a guy who was browsing the sports section because he put a book back in the wrong spot. A 50-year-old co-worker I knew was the sweetest lady ever. She was constantly cleaning and often felt distressed that she wasn't doing enough. One day, a guest complained to our resort safety department that she was driving dangerously to work. When he confronted her, she took off her shirt in the coffee shop and started yelling at him in just her bra and old lady boobs. Hope she's found help since. I used to be a part-time manager at Macy's. I've had employees steal money out of my purse, take breaks to smoke pot, get caught trying to steal hundreds of dollars, tell me they cleaned out the fitting rooms, only for me to find a locked fitting room full of clothes they just threw in there, give their friends discounts, and get fired for it, call the store manager a fat pig to her face, you name it. They tried to get me to enroll in their management training program to become a full-time salaried employee. I said nope and went to law school instead. Many years ago, I was a lowly production manager of a small team at a graphics shop. One of the dudes on my night shift got pissed at the shop owner and started taking tidy little shits on the ceiling tiles and then placing the tiles back up into the ceiling grid. An odor of poo started permeating the place and nobody knew where it was coming from. Took weeks and then we finally discovered his high altitude shit minefield. Owner grimly admitted, "I don't pay you enough to take care of this shit," and broke out the ladder, face mask, rubber gloves and bucket. TL. DR. Shit grid saboteur made it stink 2x2. I manage a family business, 3rd generation, and we all have phones with AT&T. We started getting iPhones on our account, and AT&T revamped their bills to include a line for the date and time of every single text message. Well, since we had a business account, they applied this new listing to all phones, not just the iPhones. We get our first bill in, and it's a freaking book. I'm separating the piles to review and make sure it's all good, looking mostly for slamming charges. And notice the thickest pile is not myself or the family members of the company that I would expect to be the winner. Heck, one of them is a teenage girl that has an iPhone. The biggest pile is for a delivery driver. Curious, I thumb through it, and this guy is texting day in and day out, even during business hours, when he's on the road driving. I think there is no way this can be right, and get online to get live account access and verify that this driver has an obscene amount of text messages. Month 1, 2,900 text messages. Month 2, current month I was investigating, 3,600 text messages. Let me point out, this is a flip phone, and these are outgoing messages, not incoming. Turns out he got a girlfriend and loved to sext her a lot, at all times. Fired on the spot. He also didn't delete or warn her, and we got saucy text for half an hour, as he had no way to tell her to stop. I was a supervisor for a high-end retail store that we were preparing for grand opening. We had hired one guy, we'll call him Tom, that was in his early to mid-20s. Over the course of a couple weeks, I noticed that I barely ever saw Tom during his shifts, after I sent him off to do something. One day I sent him onto the sales floor with a cart of merchandise to stock, and realized that it had been over 20 minutes, and all of the other employees had already been back 2-3 times. I was the only manager on, so I knew he didn't get sent to another task, so I asked if anyone had seen him. One girl turned to me and said, "He's probably in his cubby," and then proceeded to show me where it was. Apparently, Tom had created a cubby for himself, about 3-4 feet wide, behind some old shelving units. He had stolen a heated blanket, pillow, and various food items off of the sales floor, and that's where he had been hanging out for the majority of his shifts, for over a month, checking in with various managers at 30-45 minute intervals, so as to be seen by someone. This was his 3rd or 4th offense, so we fired him. He proceeded to rip his shirt in half and start crying while screaming, "Why?" over and over again at the top of his lungs. We then escorted him out of the building, where he continued screaming and crying while beating his chest and hawking lodgies on our windows. This kid was a complete tool, harassed all of the girls relentlessly, even me, his supervisor, tried to sell drugs on the premises, and stole non-stop. I don't know why he seriously didn't understand why he was being fired.